Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, January 7th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. We're going to talk about the national championship game, Ohio State and Alabama, as for now, still scheduled for Monday night. Don't think that's going to change, but of course, you never know here during this crazy COVID era. Then we'll also talk about all 6 wildcard weekend games in the NFL playoffs. Certainly lots to discuss there on today's show with Brad. Over at ATS.io, we're discussing a lot of things. Some interesting industry news this week. New York possibly going to go with mobile and online sports betting now. Talked about that. Also talked about Cuomo's plan to go with online and mobile betting. Bet America getting rebranded. Wrote about that this morning over at ATS.io, so you can check that out. Some great sportsbook promotions this week at DraftKings, at PointsBet, at BetMGM. Bet $1, win $100 offers at both BetMGM and also DraftKings. PointsBet offering no juice spreads on the wild card weekend, so even money on all 6 games. Max bet up to 10 grand. So a very good offer there from PointsBet Sportsbook. Read up on the sportsbook reviews, sign up for those places through ATS.io, get some sign-up bonuses, and wager here on all the great NFL and college football action coming up for this weekend. Lastly, make sure you download the ATS app. Full article integration from the website. It's a bet tracker. It's an odds screen. You got a lot of helpful handicapping tools, some good bells and whistles in that app for you to check out. You can get that through the Google Play Store, through the Apple Store, or you can go to ATS.io, go to the ATS app page at the top of the screen on your mobile device. Then you can go to the direct links to download the app. Makes it very easy for you to get that ATS app. A lot of good stuff in that. Also, premium model subscriptions available, $9.99 a week, $19.99 a month. Very helpful handicapping tool, the ATS app. We encourage you to download that today. With that, we bring on today's guest. That is professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. And Brad, how's it going today, man?
It's going well. Good to hear your voice on this fine Thursday.
Good to chat with you as well, man. And you and I got to talk a lot before the show here, too. And one of these days, we'll go ahead and record our unfiltered discussions, for everybody to check out. But I guess the first thing to talk about here is that there's one college football game left for the season. And before we get to that one, I want to ask you for sort of a season in review about what you thought of the 2020 college football season, what you did well, what maybe you didn't do so well. And then, of course, the burning question on everybody's mind here, coming out of this weird COVID season, what are you taking forward from 2020 that you think could help in 2021?
Great question. So, I probably had my best season ever in college football, at least from my newsletter that I like to talk about each week. I had my best season ever from a betting aspect. Me personally had one of my best seasons ever. But, here's me, I don't do a very good job of promoting myself. I'm not going to take hardly anything. I mean, what do I take moving forward? Not much. I think it's kind of a one-off, so I'm not going to get too high on my horse and too confident that I've, found a way to beat the system. I just think this was a one-off year type of situation where, whether I did really good or really bad, I wasn't going to overreact to those results just because it's been so different. The intriguing part to me is I have gotten to see what, individual position groups are actually worth to align. That I find that fascinating. Individual coaches being out, how much are they actually worth to a point spread? Some of those questions that we've never really had rock solid answers with data points to. We at least have some data points now. So that's one thing I'll take moving forward. And I guess I'll just say right now, hypothesis is quarterback is worth so much more than everything else is pretty much noise. Although I will say the position consistently that does not get enough credit or value in the marketplace is the center and long snapper position. I can't tell you how many times centers are out or long snappers just being bad. They need to be factored into a point spread, and they're just not.
No, I think those are all excellent points there. And, something else that you did very well is you played those Circa World Openers, and you did a great job with those. You did a great job getting a lot of line value and a lot of equity out of those as well. And obviously those aren't things that you can, suggest to clients because, it's one opener at one book with a number that's there generally for minutes, if that long. But that's something I think that you found to be really profitable for you this year. And it's a reaffirmation of the fact that, you should trust your numbers. And I think for anybody that puts a lot of time and a lot of effort into this, you really want to trust your numbers, trust the work that you're putting in. I know you put in a lot more work than most people do with college football being your primary focus, this being your career and your job. But I think it just sort of speaks to the idea that, if you're going to put in the time, if you're going to put in the effort and do the work, you got to trust what you're doing. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. And I'll say one thing I did do differently this year. I trusted my numbers more than any other year. My just pure power rating, not even getting into the handicap or anything, just going off my pure power ratings numbers. I had my best year ever for those. And I didn't deviate from those power ratings too much this year like I've done in the past. I think some of it was, for several years, I was doing weekly long form podcasts, not counting this one, but in other medias. And, I was on the radio 5 days a week during football season. And a lot of times you're looking for the narrative. What's the best story to be told? What handicap can I give that makes the most sense? And also, something that the audience can really grasp. I didn't have to deal with any of that this year. So I just trusted my numbers. And, somebody asked me, well, what else other than what I know what your number says, what else? And I didn't have to come up with some, great foolproof, handicap on the type of game. I just, stuck with it, stuck with my gut. The work that I do put on those ratings finally really paid off this year.
Well, and that's something that's a challenge for me specifically is, I'm a content creator first and a handicapper second. And like you said, you find these talking points. You try to find these things that you can write about, that you can discuss, that, make for compelling arguments, compelling radio, compelling things to read, all of that. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes none of it means anything.
Yep.
We talk about situational spots. We talk about maybe motivation, or, we talk about maybe a team playing a really tough physical game and, how that will impact them in the next game. And it's all speculatory. It's educated guesswork, and it's certainly something that could factor into the handicap, but maybe it's not going to. And with your numbers, there's a higher degree of black and white. And with what you talk about throughout the week, what you talk about in your handicapping process, it's a higher degree of gray and less black and less white. And I think it makes a lot of sense that you relied on your numbers in this COVID year where there were going to be a lot of things that would come out that we didn't know if they would impact the handicap or not. We didn't know how much they should actually mean to the betting line. You relied on what was tangible and what was in front of you and what, you put a lot of time, work, effort, emphasis into, as opposed to looking at some of those things that, are more qualitative instead of quantitative. And I think that, maybe this year, obviously, both of us wish things had gone a lot differently, but maybe the nature of college football this year was a blessing in disguise for you to realize that, your numbers do carry a lot of weight, should carry a lot of weight, and led to having a very successful season.
Absolutely. There was just some things that, I didn't know the answers. I can speculate, but I just went back to my ratings. It's like, I don't have the clear cut answer. I can come up with some great, talking point on radio or a podcast, but, I fully identified what I didn't know and didn't even try to speculate on that. So I think that kind of helped me this year, where if I was on national radio or doing so much more podcast work, I'd probably put time and effort into a game that really, when it came down to it, it didn't offer value. So that is the major thing I will take moving forward. And I'll say that my power ratings will be absolute crap next year, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I'll just put it that way.
And it speaks to a concept that you and I have talked about a lot here on the shows. There is a difference between betting and handicapping. Yep. There simply is. When you talk about trusting your power ratings, playing those openers, playing those early week numbers, that is betting. That is taking a position, playing it, realizing that, my numbers are good here. I'm going to get out in front of the market. I'm going to get some line value. And then as the week goes along and we get information like injury reports, weather, so on and so forth, that's part of the handicapping process. And those are two very, very different processes. And, I think that it's one of those things where for you, somebody who does this for a living, you can be stronger on the betting side. You can afford to put yourself out there a little bit more, have a little bit higher of a risk profile, trusting the betting side of things. When the handicapping side comes into it, that's exactly what I said, of educated guesswork, of speculating on, what this coach said, how the team may react, how they play back-to-back road games. We think about it in college basketball terms of playing consecutive games in elevation. How much does that matter to a team? We don't know. It's different from one team to the next. One team may be deeper. One team may be shallower. One team may have played 80 possessions in elevation the first game. They're going to play 65 possessions in elevation the second game. How much of an impact does that actually have? That all falls under the umbrella of handicapping. And those are two very different disciplines. The goal is the same, to win money both ways, but those are two different disciplines. And I think it's an important line in the sand to draw for our listeners here as we start thinking about the next season.
Yeah, so I couldn't have really said it better myself, but I will say this. I mean, betting, I don't have like this set number. Like on a Sunday when I'm betting circa openers, 1 week I might make a dozen bets. Some weeks I'm making 25 bets. But I also am a guy that, has a service. Can I expect, my clients to bet 25? And I get the numbers are going to move and whatnot. And some of the games I'm not going to offer. But let's just say am I going to offer 15 bets on a weekly basis on a Sunday night, Monday morning when the lines start, getting more readily available? No. So what happens during the course of the week? That's where the handicapping comes in. When you're trying to cut down to a reasonable number for your clients to bet, you're kind of looking for that perfect handicap. Okay, maybe my ratings say this, but on top of it, I have this and this and this in my favor. And usually when I'm handicapping and I cut it down to a 5 or 6 picks, which I think is technically what a lot of people are going to bet. They're not going to make 15 or 20 bets on college and turn around and make 7, 8, 9, 10 bets in the NFL the next day. That's where I think some of it comes. My issue comes where I've had issues in the past. So that's where they kind of arise. I'm looking for these perfect handicaps, and a lot of times they just don't exist.
Well, and it's like anything else. Like I love beer. I love bourbon. I love country music. I love food. There are a lot of things that I really enjoy. And when I have an opinion about something, I'm going to try to justify it. I'm going to sit there in my mind thinking that I'm right, or even knowing that I'm right. And I will sit there and come up with all of the reasons why I'm right. Why this beer is better than that beer. Why my meal was better than somebody else's. Why my opinion of a restaurant is better than somebody else's. This is just what we do as human beings. We want to be right. Nobody wants to be wrong. There's no joy taken out of being wrong. So we find this narrative, we find this argument, we find all of these justifications to prove why we're right. The handicapping process is the exact same thing. You lock in on something, you get this certain level of tunnel vision, and then what you do is you sit there and you take that side, whether it's, favorite or underdog, over or under, whatever, and you formulate this argument. And what happens is, a lot of times you're not looking at the other side, why you could be wrong, because nobody wants to sit there and think I'm wrong. And it factors into everything that you talk about with people. So that handicapping process a lot of times does become writing the best explanation for a play to justify it as much as possible. So that way, if it doesn't win for whatever reason, you sit there and say, well, you know what? I gave a compelling case. I talked about every reason why I think this is going to win, but you're not talking about any reason why it could lose, because you're trying to sell something to yourself, to other people, and it's a position that you do like. So that's where the betting part comes into play of it's black and white. I'm taking this because my number says this. You don't have to create that argument. That argument is created for you in the data that you have. So again, it's one of those things to me where just something for everybody to keep in mind as they go through that handicapping process. Take a minute and think to yourself, could I be missing something here? Is there an angle that maybe I'm not fully looking at? And I think that a two-sided handicap makes sense. And I've heard people tell me before, why would you try to come up with an argument against something that you believe in? And to me, I think it's just to get the full picture of, why you like that game or why you don't like that game. And then you sort of weigh what matters to you the most.
Yeah. And, especially if you're doing it later in the week, there is a reason the line is where it's at for the most part. I mean, you are, especially if it's late week betting, it's you against the market, you against the world, sharp bettors, and whatnot, services, syndicates, and even the public's going to have a factor. And for you to come up with this perfect handicap on why you're right and the market's wrong, maybe you can win that way, and a lot of people do, but just know fully well if it was all pro in one direction, one side, then the line would move. And if it hasn't moved, there are going to be two sides to that story, that handicap.
Yeah, it's just, again, I think it's really important to sort of reflect and think about these things. And, it's something that we can talk about after the NFL playoffs are over as well, where, that's a very different kind of market where it's a, extremely efficient market. A lot of it played more on liking numbers as opposed to sort of liking teams and matchups and situations and stuff like that in college football. But I think it is really important for everyone to sit there and, kind of think about that difference between betting and handicapping, that idea of justifying something in your mind to yourself where maybe you are kind of missing something on the other side of the handicap because you just get so locked in on liking something. It's the reason why you get these people that say, oh, that can't lose. Yep. Sure it can. Of course it can. Like my opinion could be wrong on something. I like to think that I'm right all the time. I'm clearly not. Ask my wife. But, it's one of those things where, we lock in on so much of this stuff that you wind up missing some things sometimes. And that's why, 55% is considered to be, 55, 56% would be the gold standard in this business because you are going to be wrong. It's just a matter of mitigating and limiting the amount of times that you are wrong. And so hopefully everyone's been able to do that here throughout this college football season from our show. If you've been a longtime listener, hopefully we've helped you out with a lot of those different things. But Brad, as we do a highlight video here for the national championship game, Ohio State and Alabama, talking through our thoughts. Still a lot of time left before this game. The COVID concerns that have been rumored to be at Ohio State, still a factor. The health of Justin Fields, we know nothing about. We'll see if that picture gets any clearer as we get closer to kickoff. But professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com joins me here. And Brad, Alabama -8, 75 the total for this one. What are your thoughts as of now here as we're talking early Thursday afternoon?
Yeah, I certainly lean on the Ohio State side. I've made a bet on Ohio State side at the +8. It isn't a big bet for me, but, decent bet. The reason it's not a big bet is what you just mentioned, the COVID issues for Ohio State and then the health status of Justin Fields. I know he's not going to be 100%. Is he closer to 50% or is he closer to, 80%? Is he going to be, like he was after the hit against Clemson? If that's the case, then, it doesn't really matter to me that he's dealing with a little bit of a hip or rib or whatever the injury is going to be. So the bigger thing to me is the COVID issues. And we've seen them get reported very late in the process. The Clemson game was only a few hours before the game that news trickled in that the Buckeyes were going to be missing 3-4 starters. That's the only hang up for me on why I haven't made this, a bigger bet on the Buckeyes here, but I'm certainly in their camp. And I can promise you it has nothing to do with my affinity for the state of Ohio, a state that I grew up in, or, some fanship for Ohio State that's never been there. It's actually been the opposite. I like the matchup here for the Buckeyes.
Something that I'm kind of curious about is that, this line opened in the 7.5 range. And that's about where Ohio State versus Clemson was. And nobody's putting Alabama and Clemson as a pick 'em on a neutral field. It's not happening. So before the college football playoff began, my line on this game was Alabama -11.5. Where was your number, before Ohio State beat Clemson and before Alabama had, I don't want to say a lackluster performance against Notre Dame. They certainly let up in that game. And Notre Dame covers the spread late. But do you feel like this number kind of overcorrected in the market?
It's a great question. I had a 9.5-10 Alabama. So maybe I was already a little bit higher on the Buckeyes than most. And, I did bet Ohio State against Clemson. So, look, we're dealing with a small sample size of data points with Ohio State this year. And obviously the last game being their most important sample size and data points. So typically am I upgrading a team in their power ratings 3 points this time of the year? No, but because of the extenuating circumstances that Ohio State had only played 6 games and because, they finally matched up against an elite team, I wasn't afraid to make a massive, upgrade on Ohio State's power ratings. So I bumped them up 3 points, and I know Alabama didn't cover the spread. I still bumped up Alabama a little bit just because, if you read in the analytics and that stat profile, Alabama did dominate the game much more than a 17-point final. So, right now, pure power rating, and again, this speaks kind of more towards, why it's only, a decent bet on Ohio State is, pure power rating for me on this game right now is Alabama 7.3.
No, I guess the second question here about this one is, for Ohio State too, look, this is a much different team with Trey Sermon at running back. Yep. This is a much different team having Chris Olave back. And of course, we saw that with Ohio State's ability to stretch the field, especially when they got to midfield. That's when they took a lot of their deep shots on that Clemson defense and had great success with doing that. With Alabama here, you sort of look at this Ohio State game and you look at Alabama's profile and, a team like Florida moved it on them, so how much does that factor in here where Ohio State is a dynamic offense? And I know people want to hold Ohio State's profile against them because the Big Ten was, down and such a bad conference, really pretty much across the board. How much does it factor in here that, the teams that Alabama has played that have offensive potential really did move the football on them like an Ole Miss or like a Florida?
Yeah, that certainly plays a part. The fact that we've seen teams do have success against Alabama, great success, just not success. I'm talking about, in any other year, any other time period. If you're putting 40 plus points on the board against Alabama, you're probably winning the game. So, and I think Ohio State's more talented, better coached than Ole Miss and even Florida, or at least, with Florida equal talent. With Olave and Wilson on the outside, Sermon at running back, and Justin Fields, they're just as good as the playmakers Florida had. And I'll say this, I think Ohio State's better defensively, clearly better defensively than those two teams. And 1 point, I just watched, it was Urban Meyer and Joel Klatt talking about, and Urban Meyer, which I think he's the best analyst out there in college football right now. I really respect his opinion, and I'm shocked at how good he's become on TV. But he was going back to the Florida game, and he talked about Florida's inability, and I remember this clearly, to just get a stop against Alabama's offense. Because you're going to count how many stops can you get. You're not going to, you're not going to fully, stop them for the whole game. It's just, can you slow them down a little bit? And Florida, because I don't think they're necessarily that, well coached on the defense side of the ball and just, fluke play, they had stops on Alabama's offense. 2 of them wiped away on third down penalties that Alabama's going to punt, and Florida had stupid, a lot of times after the whistle was blown, penalties that did, kept Alabama drives alive. And then the interception where the player, turned right around and fumbled it on the return. If you go back to that game, and if Florida had just gotten those 3 stops, they might have won the game outright. So to me, I kind of go back to that last big game for Alabama. No disrespect to Notre Dame, but they just don't have the playmakers on the outside like a Florida or Ohio State does. Urban Meyer bringing that up kind of swung me a little bit even more in the Ohio State direction, why I think they can not only compete with the game, but also win the game outright.
Yeah, and I agree on the Urban Meyer point. I think he's definitely been the best analyst in college football, and his
it's unbelievable.
His way of expressing it too. That's a guy that could obviously talk very technically about college football, but it makes sense to everybody. I think every viewer can kind of latch on to and appreciate what he's saying. He's done a phenomenal job with that. And that brings me to another question here. I thought Ryan Day and Kerry Coombs had excellent game plans for the Clemson game. That was a game Ohio State wanted. Realistically speaking, they were the better team in last year's semifinal game.
They were.
That was a fumble, and then Fields with the miscommunication on the interception at the end of the game when they were driving. They were the better team. They wanted that game. Dabo gave them a ton of bulletin board material, obviously, so they were plenty focused, plenty engaged. I thought that Clemson really didn't do anything that impressed me in that semifinal game. They didn't change anything from the previous year, and Ohio State was ready for it. The Buckeyes, meanwhile, took their deep shots. They ran the ball a little bit differently than they had in some of their other games. They were very well prepared. And I thought you made an excellent point on Twitter here this morning. And trends are a very polarizing thing. Some people love them. Some people hate them. Some people get on you about the sample size and this and that.
Oh, yeah.
But I thought you made an excellent point about Nick Saban and his championship game appearances for the Crimson Tide that make me wonder if, Ryan Day and his staff maybe has an edge over Alabama in this game.
Yeah, so, I looked at the comparison of, because Saban, when you got 8 championship games as far as a data point, I know in normal circumstances, I would scoff at 8-game sample size, but it's like the Patriots. You could deduct when you're talking Super Bowl props and whatnot. When you have 8 games of the same head coach, same quarterback type of thing, you can really, on how they, as far as the Super Bowl, you have enough for me to start to judge a little bit. And in Saban's case, I think you do. And my thought process was, hey, man, he used to absolutely dominate these title games. They weren't even close. And I went even back to the LSU game against Oklahoma. When he had a full month to prepare. Keep in mind, season kind of back in the BCS era, season ended, last week in November or first week in December. And then you had that full month to prep. When you gave Saban that full month in those 4 championship games, he covered the spread in all 4 and did so by almost 16 points per game. Since we moved to the playoff format, where you have much more time to prep for the semifinal, which Saban's done, for the most part really well in, but only have that 10-day prep time for the championship game. He hasn't covered any of the 4 games. He's 0-4, and it's not like a lot of them have been close. he's fell the cover by 11.5 points per game. So I just found that, that prep time, which is significantly different from the BCS to the playoff era. We're talking 3 weeks almost. Saban hasn't performed as well. And my hypothesis was Saban I think he's the GOAT. He's the best ever. Not only is he the best ever, he usually has the best roster, and also he has the best support staff. He has an army of analysts and whatnot, and when you give them a month to prep for a game, they're going to show their superiority. You give them 10 days to prep, that less time to me kind of evens the playing field a little bit.
I think it was a phenomenal point that you made. And again, trends can be picked apart for a variety of different reasons, but I do think there's something to this one. And also, too, you think about that quick turnaround and you think about kind of, what happens with Alabama year in and year out. They're losing coordinators. They're losing position coaches pretty much every year. And in the BCS era, when you have that month, as you said, you've got more time to sort of figure out your contingency plans and all of that. Here, in the semifinal, the 4 seed or the team that Alabama's faced in the semifinal generally hasn't been great. But then you get that title game, and that's where it shows up that maybe you lose a Kirby Smart. Or now you've got Steve Sarkisian, who, he's there and he's preparing, and I'm sure he wants to, end his Alabama tenure with a national championship here. But that's a guy who's also still trying to deal with, organizing the Texas program.
Yep.
So those are things that I think also hurt Alabama, with this quicker turnaround where, their coaches and their position coaches are so highly sought after that, it is a factor. It does sort of take your thought process away a little bit from that big game that's in front of you. I guess the last thing to ask you about here, and then we'll close up this highlight video and we'll keep talking a little bit more about this game off screen. And, people can hear that with the full editions of the ATS Radio podcast. The total of 75, massive total here, huge total for college football playoff game. But I don't think I want to bet the under in this game. Where are you at on the total?
I hear you. Circa opened up 77. There was some early money on the over, and it went up to 78. I bit off a little bit of a piece on the under. Just historically speaking, it's so high. If you told me even 10 years ago, you got a Big Ten team playing an SEC team in a championship game, your total is basically similar to Texas Tech and Baylor. I'm just, historically speaking, I lean under on that one. But the more I think about it, though, Adam, I wouldn't bet it now. If hindsight's always 20/20, but I wouldn't make that same bet now. College football has changed dramatically. It's won on the outside a lot, and there's so many playmakers here. I think as far as a total, my favorite actually would probably be Ohio State's team total. I've seen it like 33 and a half. I kind of want to go over Ohio State's team total.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that. Alabama, like we talked about, teams have moved it on them, and Ohio State certainly has the personnel to do that, assuming Fields is healthy and assuming, of course, that the COVID outbreak doesn't take away any of their, key skill position personnel. But, we'll probably have to wait until Monday to see what that all looks like. So, comprehensive breakdown here of the side and total for the national championship game. I'm host Adam Burke, professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers joining me. Make sure you check out all of our content on our ATS YouTube page and subscribe to the full editions of ATS Radio, which you can hear on Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, wherever you stream and download your podcast content. All right, so we don't have lines for this, and it's part of the reason why I didn't want to continue the feature video talking about this, but we talked about it a little bit on Monday with Kyle Hunter. We'll talk about it a little bit here with you now, Brad, is that we don't have numbers out. We don't have a whole lot of game props or player props or anything like that. My guess is they'll probably start popping shortly after the show, as is often the case. But if not, they'll come out Friday, Saturday, a lot on Sunday, maybe some on game day Monday. A good way to attack this game, because this is a sharp side in total. It should be the sharpest of the year with all of the money that comes in, with the focal points being these two teams in Ohio State and Alabama. As these prop numbers come out, are there any things that you're, kind of looking to play, kind of hoping to play for this game?
Yeah, I'll start with Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields, who, isn't the most mobile guy, but certainly is featured in the run game. Typically, I would say, because it's a national championship game, because it's the final game of the season, you'd expect Ohio State to run Justin Fields more in a game like this, where, if he's playing a regular season game against Rutgers, why even run the quarterback? I'm actually going to take the opposite take. I'm going to go under. I don't think you want to run Justin Fields that much because of the injury. And also it's going to take maybe just one shot and he's out of the game. I think you protect him, at least in the quarterback run game. And let's face it, your run game has been good enough without Justin Fields the last couple of weeks against Clemson and Northwestern. Average per game for him is right around the mid 40s this season. If anything comes in that price range, I want to go under his rushing total, Justin Fields, quarterback for the Buccaneers.
Yeah, I like that one. I think that's one that makes a lot of sense. Excuse me, and it's one that kind of concerns me a little bit in terms of one of the props that I was thinking of as of Monday. So I'm looking at Fields under completions, and I'm guessing this number comes out somewhere in the low 20s, maybe 20 and a half, 21 and a half, something like that. I don't think this is really a volume-based attack for Ohio State in the passing game. I think they'll do exactly what they tried to do against Clemson. Take some deep shots, attempt to stretch the field, win one-on-ones with Wilson and with Olave. And, maybe you get some tight ends in the red zone and all that. But I don't really see Fields slinging this thing around a whole lot, in part because, you do want to protect him with pass pro and, hope that the offensive line plays well and keeps him, upright and clean. But I also think, again, the emergence of Trey Sermon and what they've been able to do with him has been a significant factor here. So I was kind of thinking Fields under, if it's in that 21 and a half range for completions, I kind of like that. But what you said about not wanting to run him at all, that sort of makes me feel like he has to become a pocket passer. So maybe backs me off a little bit about that, but we'll see what that line looks like and what the VIG looks like in that one. But speaking of Sermon, I think both you and I are expecting him to have a lot to do with Ohio State's game plan here.
Yeah, certainly. And it's going to be really interesting to see where they price his number. I mean, a guy that was basically a non-factor at the start of the season, or I wouldn't say non-factor, but, he was like a 55, 60 rushing yard per game performer the first 4 or 5 games, to all of a sudden, against Northwestern, he sets the record for Ohio State with 331 yards and backs it up with 193 against Clemson. And you just look at his carries and his usage is up almost 3x. I'm anxious to see where they price his rushing total at. Are they gonna use full season average and slightly lean towards what's happened the last 2 games, or are they gonna price him like he's their feature back, even though he's playing an Alabama defense? We're gonna price him high. I'm anxious to see. I want to play over. So if you're asking me right now, anything like 125-ish, I'm going to go over. And again, it sucks that we don't have any reference points. I could be way off. Maybe they put out his number like 160, 175. I mean, I'm not going to be anxious to bet it there, but I guess my price point that I'm going to go over is like in the 125 range. I want to bet over rushing yards for Sermon.
Now, as we look at the Alabama side of things, I mean, we saw Michael Penix just completely shred the Ohio State defense in the Indiana game. But Trevor Lawrence, he didn't really find a ton to work with. I mean, they picked on Shaun Wade quite a bit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But, Trevor Lawrence just didn't find a whole lot of easy throws. The ones he did have, he kind of overshot his, target a little bit. He had a tight end down the middle of the field he missed. He missed some other throws down the sidelines, all that. I thought that was a major mistake from Clemson in that game. You attack Ohio State in the middle of the field. You don't attack Ohio State on the sidelines, because I think their linebacker play I think those guys are fine in the Big Ten. I don't think when you face teams like this, those guys have a whole lot of success. So to me, I think Alabama should attack the middle of the field quite a bit. And whether that means a steady diet of Devontae Smith, whether it means using Najee Harris in the passing game a little bit more, I think those are two things that Alabama should look to do. What do you think the offensive plan is? I mean, is this Mac Jones just slinging it around 40, 45 times?
I think that they're going to throw it quite a bit, to be perfectly honest with you. And a lot of it depends if Jalen Waddle is going to play or not. And, we'll see as we get closer to the game what that is. I don't think he's going to be super effective. He's certainly not going to be, in my opinion, the Jalen Waddle the first 4 or 5 games of the season prior to the injury, but they can use him as a decoy. And maybe instead of rolling a safety over to help Wade against Devontae Smith, if that's going to be the matchup, maybe you can't do that so much with Waddle beating you possibly over the top. That's a concern, but I'll say this. I'm looking to make some bets on Najee Harris, using him out of the backfield as a receiver. And also the guy I was really impressed with Alabama, a guy I didn't know much about, was Billingsley. They use him kind of like a tight end. He's got a tight end build. He might be a guy over the middle of the field that I was impressed with against Notre Dame, that Alabama also decides to use against those slower linebackers for the Buckeyes, and Pete Werner and Tuff Borland and Browning. Just you're right. They leave a little bit to be desired when it comes to covering somebody like that out of the backfield, or a very athletic tight end.
Yeah, I think Billingsley overs are something I'm definitely going to look at. While everyone's looking at Waddle and Devontae Smith, I think Billingsley is the guy that could wind up being the major mismatch in this game. And it's weird to say that after how bad Shaun Wade looked against Clemson if he gets on Devontae Smith. But yeah, I think Billingsley's a guy that's he's such a magnificent weapon with his size, big physical dude. And I don't think that Ohio State can cover him over the middle. So that's what I'm definitely really looking to key in on there as far as the Alabama side of things goes. But again, I'm looking forward to having these lines out there, having these things to talk about. Should be a whole lot of fun. And, hopefully we'll be able to give you some more insight with some actual odds on these things on Monday's show with Kyle Hunter in advance of the national championship game. But Brad, certainly appreciate all of your college football thoughts here over the course of the season, and good luck to you here in this final game. We transition over to the NFL side of things here. 6 games on the wild card weekend for the first time. The extra playoff team getting added, only 1 bye week. So we go ahead and start here, and I guess I'll ask you this question. For the playoffs, because it's the playoffs, does that change your handicap relative to what you'd typically do during the regular season?
No, not significantly. I mean, one thing you throw out the window is the motivation aspect. Teams are going to be motivated, so that shouldn't even really factor into your handicap. I get more time, I guess, because I'm a college guy first, and I'm dealing with 40, 50 college games and your NFL games each week. And now I got 1 championship game and NFL. So I guess I got more time to go more in depth on the NFL. I'm just talking about me personally. So, I feel like I know a little bit more than I typically do. And before people jump on me and whatnot, and say, I never had a losing NFL handicapping season until this year. And by not having a losing season, I was at least 56%, 5 years straight. It was much better success than college. I guess what helped me is what I didn't know, just didn't factor it in. And I just, it was very crystal clear that that's a play that isn't. This year, I think some of it being COVID and whatnot, and maybe maybe even a statistical anomaly. I just wasn't seeing the NFL card, but I can promise you, I don't think it has to do with time. But speaking of time, I I do have more of it, and I'd like to think I'm okay in this industry. And you give me time because I'm a grinder. Uh, Now that I can put in more time, I think I have had more success in the NFL playoffs, generally speaking.
So we take a look here at the Indianapolis Colts and the Buffalo Bills. And the Buffalo Bills, pretty much 6.5 is the market wide. Some of the more publicly tuned global shops still showing 7, but most of them are at 6.5 here. Total of 51 for this game. Was it the Bills haven't won a playoff game since what? It's been a long time, hasn't it?
I know at least the 90s.
95, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's been a long time. But that being said, the Colts, who were consistently in the playoffs with Peyton Manning and then the early parts of Andrew Luck's career, they only have one playoff appearance, I think, in the last 6 years. So a couple of teams, really looking to kind of rewrite the direction of their particular franchises.
Yeah, so this is one, how is it different compared to, past years? I mean, I don't think I'd be anxious to bet Indy, considering the fact that it's Buffalo's first home playoff game since 1996. And that is a rabid fan base that I think could make a difference. And with it being the first in a quarter century, I wouldn't be as willing to at least lean with Indy if that situation was the case. And keep in mind that they are going to have fans for the first time, but only 6,700 of them are going to be in the stadium for the Bills. It's very tough to fade a team that's covered eight in a row. But on the other, when we talk about two sides to a handicap, do you want to continue to ride the streak with the Bills? They've covered 8 straight games. That doesn't happen very often in the NFL. I'm guessing something every couple of years a team runs 8 in a row as far as a cover streak. But at some point it starts to become you're paying a premium on that team. And I think that might be a little bit of the case here. And keep in mind, I know the Colts played a very weak schedule, but this is their only second underdog role the entire season. The only other one when they were a 1-point dog at Cleveland. Now you're catching nearly a touchdown with a team that I think has the better defense, or at least a slightly better defense. That's why I'm leaning with Indy here.
It's really fascinating. I know Brian Blessing talked about this on Tuesday, that Buffalo's covered like 10 or 11 first halves in a row.
Wow.
They play from in front. And that is something that worries me a little bit here about Indianapolis, because I think Indy needs that balance. They need to be able to run the football. They need to not put it all on Rivers' shoulders. I mean, we know that Phillip Rivers in close games has been kind of a difficult thing to put money on. So I think Indianapolis, they need to not have this first half get away from them. Whether or not that's the case remains to be seen. I think Buffalo, with a healthy defense now, with Matt Milano back, with Trey Edmonds healthy, with, Tre'Davious White getting a blow last week, not playing the game. I think Buffalo's defense at full strength is a pretty solid unit. Yep. I agree with you that I think there's some premium being paid here on Buffalo. I think that is definitely a fair point to make. If this game is played probably 3 weeks ago, it's Buffalo 4.5, 4,
yep,
something like that probably. So I do think there is a premium in this game. However, that being said, and I've talked about this a lot in terms of teams that have had the bye week, I'd rather play on a team playing really well coming into the playoffs than a team coming into the playoffs like the way Indianapolis has played. They've won games to get there, but, that's a 1-possession game against Jacksonville in the third quarter last week. 2 1-score wins over Houston, a game they probably should have lost with that fumble inside the 5. They blew out the Raiders in the second half. The Raiders have a bunch of problems. And then they blew that lead to Pittsburgh. Buffalo, like you said, 8 straight covers, learned something from that Arizona game. They're playing at a very high level. And when you get to the playoffs and you're playing against other teams in the NFL that are on your level or close to it, I'd rather have the team playing well. And I'll talk about that again with the first game on Sunday between Baltimore and Tennessee. But to me, I think I could talk myself into Buffalo. I think Buffalo first half is worthy of consideration. Maybe Buffalo first quarter. But, as far as the full game goes, I understand the hesitance in laying 6.5 with the Bills.
Yeah, and, one thing I'm just thinking of that concerns me is, keep in mind, the Colts play in a division where they play dome games. and then every other team in their division is, a warm Tennessee, I guess it isn't so much, but at least a warmer weather team than Buffalo with a very old quarterback in, cold conditions. We've seen that they just don't have it anymore. Yeah, I mean, when it shows up is when the weather's not perfect. It's not 75 degrees and your bones are loose and whatnot. I know I'm speaking from experience now that I'm in my upper 30s. I feel a hell of a lot better when it's 75 instead of it's 25 outside. So that would be a concern. Rivers really showing his age in a game where, it's not played in ideal conditions.
Yeah, and again, the thing for Buffalo, they had some bad weather games that kind of hurt their offense early on, but I mean, they've been humming along on the offensive side here.
Think?
Allen's been healthy. Allen wasn't healthy for the 2 games that they lost early in the year, losing on the Hail Mary. I think Buffalo's body of work, does breed a certain level of confidence, but again, 6.5. It's one of those things where I know I'm paying a premium and I have to decide if I want to do it. And
absolutely.
That remains to be seen here for that early Saturday game. The Rams in Seattle, and I need to correct something here at the top talking about this game. I've screwed up multiple times this week in things I've written and things I've read. I was looking at a source and maybe I read it wrong or something like that. Seattle and the Rams, Seattle closed 1.5 a few weeks back when these two teams played in week 16. It was not 3.5. My apologies for that. Something I should have, double checked, triple checked. So mea culpa for that one. But this line here that was 4.5, now down to 3.5. You and I were having a discussion before the show here. Is this indicative of some positive thoughts with regards to Jared Goff? Or is this a case where people are looking at John Wolford and the performance that he had last week and saying, you know what, this difference just isn't really worth a 3-point adjustment?
I think that there is some truth to that. I find it very intriguing that the line isn't more. Not that I'm saying that the value's on Seattle here, because I'll be perfectly frank, I'm not a big Jared Goff fan. I think he's a below average quarterback. I think this line right here, the fact that these two teams just played 2 weeks ago in the same venue with a lot to play for in that game, and Seattle was laying 1.5, and now it's a playoff game, max motivation, 3.5 with a backup quarterback. That should, and it's not like John Wolford is a known commodity as far as a backup. I think coming in the season, people would say he's a well below average backup, if not one of the worst in the league, just because we didn't know. That shows you that Jared Goff ain't worth much. And I'll be honest with you, sounds about right to me. I don't think he's worth that much.
Well, and I think here too, something that's interesting about this game is that, this Rams defense, I don't know if it's gotten enough press of how good this defense is.
Yep.
Last week they were missing Michael Brockers, should get him back off the COVID list here for this week. This is an excellent defense. And Seattle's defense, they've held, I think it's the last 6, 7, 8 opponents, something like that, to 23 or fewer points in every game. This defense has done a complete 180 from what we saw earlier in the year with Jamal Adams healthy, with Carlos Dunlap coming over from the Bengals. They've played really well defensively. So you sort of look at this and you kind of start thinking to yourself, like, I know NFL unders are very hard to play, but and 42.5 is a very low number, but
yep.
I'm not expecting a lot of points here.
Yeah, under is my preference as far as where I'm going to bet the game. That's what I have bet. You'd hope to get 43 is kind of a key number. So maybe there's hope that then maybe it can get back in that range. But, Seattle games prior to last week, 7 straight unders. And if you paid attention to that game, that was a bad beat if you bet the under. 34 fourth quarter points in that one. I think there was only like 15 heading into it. So that was a bad beat. Should be 8 straight unders for Seattle games. And the Rams were one of the lower scoring teams in the entire NFL, 12-4 to the under this year. And now you got, questions at the quarterback position. The two teams' previous meetings this year, neither one top 40 points. Yeah, unders. I think under is the way to go here.
And one other thing, and again, maybe this has something to do with, where this line is kind of sitting and all of that. But, when you look at what happened with Russell Wilson over the second half of the year, Russell Wilson, he had a 28-8 touchdown interception ratio in the first 8 games, 9.23 adjusted net yards per pass attempt. In the last 8 games, 12-5 touchdown interception ratio, 6.46 adjusted net yards per pass attempt. So a lot less explosive for this passing attack, a lot fewer touchdown passes, fewer interceptions in that range, but fewer deep shots as well. This Seattle offense in the middle of the year kind of did an about face where they started running the football more.
Yep.
Wilson wasn't as explosive. You kind of worry about that here for Seattle and wonder if they can flip that switch and get back to being that really potent passing attack.
Not against this Rams defense.
I don't think it happens against this defense. So I think the under are kind of a consensus look from us here. What about the primetime game on Saturday? Tampa Bay, Washington. Tampa Bay laying 8.5 or 9. There are some 9s out there in the global marketplace. Total 45 for this one. This total has come down a little bit throughout the course of the week. Can you lay the big number here with Tampa Bay?
I can't. I like Washington. And maybe I'm going to get my teeth kicked in. It's a lamb to the slaughter here. But, I mean, here's what I like about Washington. They've been consistent on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, they have held 7 straight opponents to 20 points or less. I mean, that's not a team that I'm willing to run to the window to lay more than a touchdown against, a team that doesn't give up any points. I mean, for almost half a season, 20 points or less, every team. And then on top of it, Washington, yeah, they're a losing team. They're not a losing team when Alex Smith is behind center. They're 5-1 when he starts. So this isn't Dwayne Haskins lining up and starting for the football team here. And, another thing, and I'll credit, Ralph Michaels for this stat. Since the NFL went to the current division format in 2002, there's been 7 teams that have made the playoffs, either at 8-8 or worse. They've had that losing record. How do those teams do in the wild card? 7-0 against the spread. A lot of people want to throw that losing team in the trash, and not only 7-0 against the spread, 6 of them won outright. So I don't expect Washington to win outright here, but yeah, I even though the market's against me a little bit here, I'll take Washington plus 8.5.
And again, you see this total coming down. Thoughts of a lower scoring expectation in this game that helps getting points. It certainly helps. The strong Washington defense. Tampa Bay is an interesting team to me because in their last 4 games after the bye, they played exceptional on offense. They figured it out. They started using Brady a lot more effectively in terms of, the routes that they were running, not making him throw as many deep balls, lots of underneath, put it in space, let your skill guys do work. And that's really what you want to do with both Brady and with this Tampa Bay offense. The thing about Washington is that unlike a lot of teams out there in the NFL that have to send safeties and corners and linebackers and all that, they get their pressure with the base front 4. So they can actually play in coverage. And that's why they had the 3rd best completion percentage against in the NFL this year. I don't see Tampa Bay getting a lot of really big explosive plays in this game. I don't know if the Washington pass rush gets there because Brady's getting it out quick and they've made that adjustment. But I just don't see Tampa Bay moving in big chunks here in this game. The question I have is, can Washington move it? Alex Smith, while they were 5-1 when he started, he had more interceptions than touchdown passes this year. So that is concerning for me. And also Tampa Bay, a very good run defense, best in the league in yards per carry allowed. So can Washington move the football enough to not get blown out in this game? To me, I think the answer is actually yes. I think this Tampa Bay defense has gotten worse as the season has gone along. And Ron Rivera has a lot of familiarity with that Tampa Bay personnel, albeit with a different team. So I like Washington plus 8.5, plus 9. I kind of like under 45, but not as much. But I do think Washington will be more competitive in this game than people realize.
Yeah, so a couple things. Historically speaking, how do you beat Tom Brady? You get pressure, and it's in the interior front of the defense a lot of times. I mean, you go back to those Giants games, defensive line for those Giants in those 2 Super Bowls pretty much were the MVPs, in my opinion, of those Super Bowls, getting, pressure on Brady, who's not very mobile. I think Washington's capable of that. Also, I think there's too much being made about Tampa Bay's improvements on the offense side of the ball. I mean, in the last 2 games, it came against interim coaches. Detroit and Atlanta. You look at the other 2 games coming off the bye. The Minnesota game was a little bit deceiving because Minnesota missed 4 field goals in the game. That helped them win and cover that one. And the Atlanta game, they had to fight, claw, and scratch and do what typically most teams do against Atlanta, rally from a huge deficit. So it's not like I was overwhelmed in that game. So I just think after the 2 blowout wins the last 2 weeks, people are really, I think, giving too much credit to Tampa Bay. All of a sudden is this really high-powered offense.
Well, and the last point I'll make here on this game to speak to, we talked about earlier in the show how trends are pretty polarizing and people will criticize them and criticize the sample size and all of that. Yeah, it's a trend that goes back to 2004 about, teams that were 500 or worse getting into the playoffs and how they do against the spread. And yeah, it's a small number of games in that span, but that's one to me where it just speaks to, as you said, nobody wants to play that team. That line gets inflated. That line already starts high to begin with because, nobody thinks anything of that team. And usually the first wild card winds up with a really good record and usually a pretty good statistical profile. That's one where, again, I think that's something where the line gets inflated. And that's something that I think has relevance over a larger sample size because we still see this. We still see lines inflated based on perception or, just based on simple market activity where nobody wants to bet Washington against Tom Brady and what the Buccaneers have done over the last several weeks. I think this line could continue to go up, quite frankly, to the point where it's 9 market wide, maybe 9.5 on Washington. And like you, I think they are competitive in this game. So I think it's a trend that, while it is over a large sample size or over a large number of years and a small sample size, still has relevance because it's just a market philosophy thing, not anything about, the teams involved.
Two things. I think, the public can have more say in the NFL more and more because the public's betting more and more as far as the NFL goes. And just generally speaking, the public is, so they can have a say as far as the market. And obviously they're going to want to play the favorite. And I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 9. Teaser protection. People are playing teasers left and right. And I mean, even sharp guys are going to want to tease, Tampa Bay down through key numbers of 7 and 3 here. And why wouldn't you at least try to move it to 9 to avoid and protect yourself from all those 6-point teasers on Tampa Bay? So, I mean, if I'm a bookmaker, I wouldn't be afraid to do it depending on what my, risk tolerance was.
No, that's an excellent point. Very good point, especially as we get closer to this game here and a lot more public money starts flowing into the market. We go to Sunday and Baltimore and Tennessee. And for those that listen to the show regularly, I have a little side bet here with Brian Blessing. I've got Baltimore minus 3.5. He's got Tennessee plus 3.5. And this is what I talked about earlier with Indianapolis and Buffalo. People want to point to what Tennessee did to Baltimore last year. Tennessee was the hottest team on the planet when they went into the playoffs last year. Baltimore off of a bye. If I remember correctly, they didn't play anybody in week 17 either. So they basically had 2 full weeks off, then trying to get back into rhythm, play this hot Tennessee team. A Tennessee team they outgained by 230 yards, but Baltimore was essentially minus 7 in turnovers. They had 3 turnovers, 0 for 4 on 4th down. That's how a game gets away from you. Baltimore's playing at a much higher level coming into these playoffs. They've had to play everybody in order to get their playoff spot. And this Tennessee defense, I know Tennessee can score, but defensively, they're a train wreck. I still like Baltimore here, even at 3 with extra juice or 3.5.
I don't. I'm kind of on the. I think Baltimore wins, especially at 3.5. I'll take Tennessee. And to me, if they were to get revenge, wouldn't have been the home game earlier this year. I mean, that would have been the circle of wagons. Hey, this team beat us, shouldn't have in the playoffs the year before, and yet Tennessee went on the road, won in overtime against Baltimore. And this is another case where hot team, kind of like Buffalo, and I think. You're paying a little bit of a premium on a Baltimore team that's covered 6 games in a row. But then I look at, who they've beaten down the stretch here, at least in their 5-game straight up winning streak. I mean, the only winning team is a road game against Cleveland, which obviously, fully well could have went either way. I mean, I guess I'm not overly impressed with dominant wins over Dallas and Jacksonville and the Giants and Cincinnati. Kudos for them, exceeding expectations, even laying big numbers. I just think, it's a step up in class as far as competition here. And I'm going to lean with Tennessee that I think I really respect Vrabel, and I think he has probably a solid game plan to defend Lamar Jackson.
All right. Well, difference of opinion here on this one again for me. So, I think I'll stick with one side bet on the game. I know you owe me a few dinners anyway. So, when I come
I don't know if it's a dinner bet. I think I'd rather the dinner bet. I was looking a little bit more on Buffalo Indy. I'll say this, man. I think you are paying a big premium on Buffalo, especially just a few weeks ago. Buffalo was laying 2 against Pittsburgh. I bet Buffalo in that game, liked them. Keep in mind, Indianapolis, like the week after that, was laying a point at Pittsburgh. So Buffalo -2 at home against Pittsburgh. Indy was thought to be better than the Steelers the very next week when they were laying a point on the road. And now you're telling me this line is, near a touchdown. If you want a dinner bet, I'll take the Colts instead of this, the Titans-Ravens matchup.
I think there's a little too much variance in that game between the Colts and the Bills. I'm gonna put my tail between my legs in that one. but all right, fine. I'll say this though.
Yeah.
Can anybody in the AFC beat Kansas City other than Buffalo?
No, I think Buffalo. I'll say right now. I mean,
Buffalo's
I think
the second
Buffalo's
best team in the AFC by far.
Buffalo's playing the best football of anybody in the NFL right now.
Yes.
I have I'm a little gun shy to pick Buffalo over Kansas City because I go back to that when Kansas City wanted to play in that Buffalo game. If you remember back to the regular season, I think they outgained Buffalo by like 250 yards on the road in that one. That concerns me a little bit, but there's no question Buffalo is the second best team in the AFC.
Josh Allen was hurt for that first game, though. Wasn't that right after he got hurt in the Oakland or the Las Vegas game?
Oh, yeah, you're right. No, you're right. I forgot about that.
So whatever, that's fine. I just know that next time I go out to Vegas, I'm getting food off of Blessing. I'm getting food off of you. I'm not going to have to pay for anything. So it'd be perfect.
There you go.
All right, so let's go to this Chicago-New Orleans game. And if you're like me, this is the game that you have the least interest in, probably watching as well as betting, but maybe not. Could be wrong here. New Orleans, a 10-point favorite, 47 the total for this one. New Orleans has a million, playoff heartbreaks here. I don't think one of them happens this week, but, would you take them to cover the 10 here against a 500 Chicago team?
Nah, I'd lean Chicago. I mean, keep in mind, Chicago was very competitive against the Saints earlier this year at home. I mean, I bet the Saints in that matchup, and the game went to overtime. I was another frustrating loser for me this year. I agree with you to start off. I'm not going to have other than a pizza bet on this game. And I guess where I want to go is the over. I mean, Chicago's found their offense a little bit here down the stretch. 5 of the last 6 games that went over for Chicago. This time of year, you always got to worry about weather. You don't in the dome. Lean over for me, but nothing more than a ham sandwich.
Yeah, there's something about this game that just seems unappealing. And I don't know if it's just kind of an unattractive matchup because – I'm not a huge believer in Chicago. I think New Orleans is a very good team. If their defense shows up here in the playoffs, I think that you could make a case they're the best team in the NFC. But, I don't know what Breeze is going to look like. Hopefully they get Michael Thomas back this week. I know he's practicing. Kamara's a massive question mark still. I don't see a whole lot of reasons to, play this one, especially when I've got some stronger opinions on the other games. And look, if I'm playing all 6 games this weekend thinking I have an edge, that's probably a mistake on my part.
Very good point. Very strong point.
If I'm playing them because I'm going to watch them and because it's the playoffs and I'm going to bet, smaller on them, that's cool. But, nothing says you have to bet all 6 of these games. And maybe that theory applies here as well to the last game of the wild card weekend, Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Steelers anywhere from 5.5 to 6.5. Some 5.5s have popped back up at some of the sharper global markets. A lot of 6 around the U.S. markets, total 47.5. And, so far, there hasn't been any more Browns news to come out over the last couple of days, but we know that's certainly a possibility as we head into this game. Did you have a position on this one before all the COVID stuff and before this line kind of ran out?
I did. My top play was Pittsburgh. And I know it's easy to say, the line's moved a couple points, but I'd still would bet right now. Still, I'd bet Pittsburgh, even though it's moved a couple of points, and I'd lay the 6 points here with the Steelers. And, call me cynical, but following, Cleveland Browns football for the last 20, 25 years, I can't imagine anybody's being very confident wanting to bet Cleveland at this point. Pittsburgh's absolutely owned them, especially at home. 17 straight home wins against Cleveland. And then you could say, oh, this is a different Cleveland team. Most of those teams were garbage. The Steelers beat them 38-7 at home this year. I think Kevin Stefanski's really good. And the fact that he's, you tell me if I'm wrong, but he's obviously, a play caller. And an actual guy that's calling plays, is worth something to the line. And to take him out of there, I think is just devastating for a team that's looking to have confidence. Steelers have the best defense according to DVOA. Cleveland played one of the weakest schedules in the NFL and got outscored despite an 11-5 record. So playoff experience, series experience, the COVID situation. I know it's very public, but you know what? I'll go down. If Pittsburgh doesn't cover, then I'm not going to have any regrets laying the points here with the Steelers.
To play devil's advocate, to stick up for my hometown team that I've certainly have a lot of bad memories with. The fact that they've been outscored for the season doesn't really bother me that much because they got blown out in week 1 by Baltimore. We all know John Harbaugh is money in week 1, and the Browns' new coaching staff, all that, no preseason, so on and so forth. That game against Pittsburgh, Baker throws an early pick 6. That really put Cleveland out of their game plan. And, those scripted plays, I mean, those are things that are very important. Coaches hold those near and dear. The idea of giving up a pick 6 early in the game, not really being able to go through the game script that you had, it kind of allowed Pittsburgh to run out and sort of take care of the Browns in that game. So there is that. I mean, the 2 big blowouts did impact their point differential. They won a lot of close games. They're a better team to play as an underdog. There's no denying that. I played Pittsburgh minus 4.5 as the COVID news was breaking, not as a position necessarily, but just, okay, Stefanski's got it. Van Pelt could very well get it. Those guys obviously work hand in hand with Baker Mayfield. He's exposed to those guys all the time. Defensively, they're already a mash unit where they've got COVID guys, they've got injured guys. I mean, they're playing dudes off the practice squad. Robert Jackson last week wasn't even on the team like 3 weeks ago. There are a lot of reasons not to like Cleveland in this game. And that's why it would be Pittsburgh or nothing for me. But as far as a true position now at 6, I don't think I could take anything. I don't think Pittsburgh's very good. I don't think the Steelers are a good football team. Offensively, they're below average. Defensively, with all the injuries, they're not a great unit there. They've lost some of their speed rushers. They will at least get TJ Watt back this week. I just don't think Pittsburgh is that good of a team. And frankly, I will fade them next week. I don't care who they play.
Yeah.
And I think that they're one and done if they beat the Browns here. I think that's probably the strongest thing is I hope Pittsburgh wins big if they're going to win this game so that it's easier for me to go against them next week.
Probably would play Baltimore, or not Baltimore, but play Buffalo on the road. So, yeah, I bet Buffalo there. I totally agree with that. And look, there wasn't a lot to like about the Steelers down the stretch last 6 games. But I did like their fight. I mean, just as in a franchise, if you're a fan of, you got to appreciate, coming from when they're dead in the water against the Colts, they rally, get the win. And I mean, with their backups last week, the fight, claw, and scratch against the Browns. I mean, you talk about hindsight being 2020. I can't believe I didn't, have a bigger bet on Pittsburgh last week plus 10 against the Browns. I've seen this story so many times. I'm going to be very surprised, and I think it would be a big black eye on Pittsburgh if they don't take care of business here. By taking care of business, winning, but by at least more than a field goal, at least if not a touchdown or more. If they can't get it against this Cleveland team, then of course my bigger bet will be fading the Steelers next week.
I got to say, man, I wonder here, this will be the last point I make in the NFL. I wonder how many millions of Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Pittsburgh 3-team 6-point teasers there are going to be out there in the marketplace this week. I mean, teasing Buffalo to a pick 'em, Pittsburgh to a pick 'em, and Tampa Bay below 3. The public's going to flock to that like crazy. I'm just curious to see which one of those teams ends up screwing it up.
Oh, one will. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you used the word public. I don't think a lot of pros, they want that. They want that key number. You only get that in the Tampa Bay game. Yeah, public's going to be doing that. And I'm wondering if they do those, super, the teasers, those 10.3 team ones. I wonder how many people are going to be doing that. There's going to be at least one game that really upsets the apple cart.
No, there's going to have to be. I mean, last week, the last couple of weeks, public's done really well over the sports books from what I remember. So, we'll see if that changes on a dime here for the wild card weekend. But always enjoyable, insightful, great to chat with Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper from bradpowersports.com. And Brad, what's happening over at the website right now, brother?
Yeah, it's called my Powers Picks newsletter. And if you're looking for not only the rest of this season, but all of next season, both NFL and college, real simple. It's $69. And you're covered all the way through next year's Super Bowl. By next year's Super Bowl, I mean the 2022 Super Bowl. So $69, check it out. You can download past issues for free, see what I'm all about. You can get picks. You get information, you get my power rings, you name it. It's a one-stop shop for both college football and the NFL.
And of course, you're wiping the dust off the college basketball stuff now too, right?
Yeah, I'm easing my way into it a little bit. Had a really nice winner on Kansas the other night and thought, hey, I could do this. I'm ready to go. And then was really humbled last night taking Minnesota against Michigan.
Yeah, well, no, college basketball, tough nut to crack, especially with, this year, it's insanity with the way the schedules have kind of played out, all the COVID pauses and all that. But I know you're doing your due diligence on college hoops. I'm sure you'll be, doing some more stuff with that. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to talk about that here a little bit more in future weeks. But Brad, always a treat. Thank you so much, man. And we'll talk to you again real soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
There you go. There's professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com at Brad Powers and the number 7 on Twitter. Coming up on our Friday edition of ATS Radio, we're going to put a bow on the Circa Sports Million with Chris at Las Vegas Chris, who finished 2nd and 5th in the Circa Sports Million with his 2 entries. We'll talk about his thought process for contests. He's been very, very good with them in the past. Then we'll also talk a little bit with him about his thoughts here for the wild card weekend. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.